This is the summary of Heartless Hunter, summarized by Cellwave Audio and narrated by Archie. Introduction. Heartless Hunter opens the Crimson Moth duology with a world that is both beautiful and brutal, a society glittering on the surface yet fractured beneath. Kristen Ciccarelli constructs a setting where power has shifted violently. Witches who once reigned with terrifying majesty are now reduced to fugitives, their blood feared, their rituals outlawed, and their very existence hunted down. The revolution that promised justice has instead birthed a regime of suspicion and cruelty. And it is in this unstable landscape that two lives collide, one sworn to protect what remains of magic, the other sworn to extinguish it. At the center of this narrative is Rune Winters, a young woman whose public identity as a flighty socialite conceals the far more dangerous truth that she is the Crimson Moth, a vigilante who risks everything to rescue witches from persecution. Her double life is a tightrope act, demanding she dazzle high society with charm by day while navigating blood-soaked alleys and whispered networks by night. Opposite her stands Gideon Sharpe, a devoted captain of the Blood Guard, raised on the revolution's ideals and convinced that witches are too dangerous to live. When Rune and Gideon cross paths, their opposing missions entangle them in a perilous dance of deception, attraction, and betrayal. The story is not merely one of romance and resistance, but of the human heart under impossible pressure. Ciccarelli draws out themes of loyalty, identity, and the blurred lines between love and duty. The narrative pulses with tension, both political and personal, as Rune and Gideon circle one another, secrets held behind every smile, truths lurking beneath every glance. For readers, Heartless Hunter is both an escape into a lushly imagined fantasy and an exploration of the costs of survival when ideals collide with desire. It is an invitation to step into a world of masquerades, blood magic, and moral ambiguity, where nothing is ever as simple as it first seems. Disclaimer. This is an unofficial summary and analysis of book title by the author. It is not the original book, and is not affiliated with or authorized by the author or publisher. This work is intended to provide key insights, analysis, and commentary for educational and informational purposes only. All names, trademarks, and references to the original content remain the property of their respective owners. Every effort has been made to ensure fair use under Section 107 of the Copyright Act. Readers are encouraged to purchase the original book from the author or publisher for the full experience and context. Overture. The overture begins like a whispered warning, drawing the reader into a world still trembling from the shockwaves of revolution. Once witches ruled as queens, their blood magic a force of awe and terror that kept their subjects both obedient and enthralled. But the revolution stripped them of their crowns, branding them not as sovereigns but as threats. Now witches are hunted relentlessly, their fading powers reduced to embers that flicker only in secret. The landscape that emerges is not one of harmony after liberation, but of fracture and fear, where suspicion permeates every glance and survival often depends on secrecy. This overture does more than establish the setting. It sets the tone of precarious tension that runs like an undercurrent through the entire novel. Readers are not invited into a stable kingdom or a triumphant aftermath, but into a society still unsettled, where new hierarchies are built on the ruins of old empires, and violence simmers beneath the glitter of high society. Every character who steps into this stage carries the weight of history on their shoulders. For the hunted witches, it is the memory of lost power. For the hunters, it is the conviction that they have torn down a tyranny only to create their own. The overture is brief but charged, an intake of breath before the descent into Rune Winters's dangerous masquerade. Chapter 1. Rune. The story opens in Rune's voice, immediately drawing us into the fragile duplicity of her existence. By day she is the darling of fashionable society, a young woman whose wit and charm make her sparkle across the salons and parlors of the capital. Yet beneath this polished mask lies the Crimson Moth, a secret identity spun out of desperation and defiance. From the very first chapter we feel how precarious her world is. One half lived in glittering light, the other in hunted shadow. The Blood Guard, ruthless and unyielding, prowl the city searching for witches to expose and destroy, and Rune has chosen to put herself directly in their path. She has made her life into a lie so convincing that no one suspects the girl who dances through soirée is the same figure who slips through the alleys at night to rescue the condemned. This opening chapter lets us inhabit the pressure of that duality. Rune is sharp-eyed and calculating, always aware that every word she speaks and every gesture she makes could tip the balance between safety and ruin. The ballrooms and parlors that others see as glittering stages are for her battlegrounds in disguise, where information must be gathered, alliances hinted at, and suspicions deflected. The thrill of danger pulses beneath her careful laughter, but so too does exhaustion, the weariness of someone already stretched thin by the enormity of her burden. We also glimpse her inner compass, the unyielding reason she continues to risk everything, the lives of witches still trapped, still hunted, still counting on her. Chapter 1 establishes Rune not simply as a rebel in hiding but as a woman already burning with conviction, a flame that both illuminates her courage and threatens to consume her if she falters. Chapter 2 Rune. In Chapter 2, Rune's double life comes into sharper focus as the cost of her rebellion grows heavier. The glamour of her public persona, the laughter, the quick wit, the well-trained smile becomes a mask that is increasingly suffocating, for behind it she is haunted by the memories of those she could not save, and the dread of those she is yet to rescue. The city itself mirrors her unease, glittering on the surface but shadowed with fear, its streets patrolled by the Blood Guard whose presence is both a physical threat and a psychological weight. Rune has learned to weave through this world like a dancer, gliding where others would stumble, but beneath her grace is calculation, always calculation. Every entrance she makes into a drawing room or onto a ballroom floor is an act of strategy, her charm a weapon as sharp as any blade. This chapter also deepens our sense of Rune's humanity. Though she moves with elegance, she is not invulnerable. Her courage does not erase her fear, and Ciccarelli lingers on the small, revealing details, the racing pulse she must calm before approaching a guard, the whisper of doubt she must silence before slipping into the night. Rune is fighting not just for survival but for meaning, for the belief that her actions, dangerous as they are, can tip the scales in favor of hope. That conviction is what keeps her in motion, even when exhaustion and dread press in. Chapter 2 closes with the sense that Rune's rebellion is not a series of isolated acts but a gathering storm, and though she wears the face of a glittering socialite, the Crimson Moth beneath is preparing to strike again no matter how high the risk. Chapter 3 Gideon. This chapter shifts the lens to Gideon, and with him, the tone hardens into discipline and restraint. Where Rune's chapters are colored by secrecy and the delicate balance of deception, Gideon's voice is that of order, sharpened by years of loyalty to the Blood Guard. He sees the world in clean lines. There is law and there is chaos, obedience and treason, purity and corruption. The Crimson Moth represents more than a fugitive to him. She is the embodiment of defiance, a living insult to the Guard's authority. Every act of sabotage she commits cuts at the order he has sworn to uphold, and Gideon takes that insult personally. His pursuit is not born of curiosity but of conviction, the unyielding belief that rebellion must be extinguished before it spreads. Yet Ciccarelli hints at complexity beneath his discipline. Gideon is not the caricature of a zealot, but a man who feels the weight of expectation pressing against his own sense of identity. He is the product of a world that demands loyalty at the expense of questioning, and his sharp eye is as much a shield as it is a weapon. In this chapter we see him reading the city like a battlefield, noticing the subtle shifts in rumor, the patterns of resistance, the hidden veins of unrest pulsing through the streets. He is calculating, relentless and efficient, yet there is a quiet undertone of isolation in his perspective, as if duty has carved him away from softer human connections. Chapter 3 establishes Gideon as both hunter and guardian, a man who believes his purpose is ironclad, even as the narrative prepares to test how unshakable that belief truly is. Chapter 4: Rune. This chapter immerses us back into Rune's world, and the contrast with Gideon's disciplined rigidity could not be sharper. Here, the ballrooms and drawing rooms once again become her stage, though the reader feels how precarious every gesture is. Rune performs her role flawlessly, dazzling with charm and wit, but behind every glance and laugh is the constant awareness of eyes that might linger too long, ears that might catch a slip in her words. To the society that adores her, she is a glittering ornament, untouchable in her elegance. To herself, she is a prisoner of the performance, aching for the night when she can shed the silks and step into the shadows as the Crimson Moth. Ciccarelli paints this duality with care, the luxury of her surroundings always underscored by the danger humming beneath. Yet this chapter also reminds us of the stakes that drive her. Rune carries the faces of those she has saved, and the memory of those she failed to reach as both burden and fuel. Her compassion is not abstract, it is deeply personal, born of loss and sharpened into resolve. The society mask is not simply camouflage, but a tool she wields with precision, extracting information from careless nobles, overhearing whispers that become the lifeblood of her rebellion. Here we feel Rune's genius for survival. She transforms her vulnerability into strategy, her fear into fuel. Chapter 4 tightens the threads between her public role and her secret mission, showing that every step she takes in the light is designed to serve the shadows, though with each performance the danger of discovery presses closer. Chapter 5: Rune. In Chapter 5, Rune's world expands beyond the surface sparkle of society, revealing the dangerous rhythm of her nightly work as the Crimson Moth. The chapter begins with the unease of preparation, the quiet rituals, the careful concealment, the practiced calm she forces upon herself before stepping into the dark. Rune's courage here is not loud but deliberate, built from repetition and necessity, and the reader feels how intimately she understands the risks. Each mission is a gamble, each spell or whispered lie a thin thread between life and capture. Ciccarelli captures the way danger sharpens Rune's senses, the way the flicker of a torch or the shifting of a guard's stance becomes an entire language she must read fluently to survive. Beneath the tension, this chapter offers a more intimate glimpse of Rune's heart. Saving witches is not just rebellion for her, it is remembrance, a promise to those who can no longer be saved, a vow that their suffering will not be erased in silence. The secrecy, the lies, the danger, all of it circles back to that sense of duty that burns hotter than her fear. Yet the cost is clear. Her body aches from sleepless nights, her mind is frayed by the strain of sustaining two lives, and the loneliness of carrying this burden alone presses on her more sharply than ever. Chapter 5 embodies the paradox of Rune's existence, that her boldest acts of courage must remain unseen, and her truest self must remain hidden even as she grows more determined to fight. Chapter 6: Rune. Rune's balancing act deepens, placing her squarely in the glittering social world where she must perform with flawless precision even as her mind strains toward the shadows of her secret life. The gatherings of nobility are painted in dazzling detail, chandeliers scattering light like shards of glass, gowns and masks concealing as much as they reveal, conversations drifting like smoke full of both vanity and quiet malice. Rune navigates this world with studied brilliance, her every word a careful weapon, her charm a veil that hides the pulse of fear beneath. To the people around her she appears untouchable, but Ciccarelli lets us feel the thrum of nerves beneath the surface, the constant question of whether her smile will hold, whether her eyes will betray the secrets burning behind them. This chapter also presses on Rune's isolation. Though she moves in a crowd, she is alone in the truest sense, unable to share the truth of who she is with anyone. The contrast between the hollow glitter of her public life and the raw urgency of her hidden mission grows sharper, and it weighs on her like armor that is both protection and prison. Yet, even in the midst of this strain, we glimpse the ember of defiance that fuels her. She listens to the careless boasts of the powerful and files them away as weapons for her cause. She endures the endless charade not because she enjoys the dance, but because every step, every smile and every false confidence buys her the time and freedom to act in the shadows. Chapter 6 leaves us with the sense that Rune's performance is becoming harder to sustain, even as the stakes for maintaining it rise higher than ever. Chapter 7 Gideon. We return to Gideon, whose voice slices through the haze of Rune's masked world with the cold precision of the Bloodguard. Where Rune's chapters pulse with secrecy and vulnerability, Gideon's are grounded in discipline and the relentless pursuit of order. He views the city not as a place of glittering spectacle but as a map of unrest, where every whisper of defiance must be traced and stamped out. The Crimson Moth looms large in his thoughts here, not merely as a nuisance, but as a threat to the Guard's authority and to the stability he has sworn to protect. Each escape she engineers gnaws at his pride, each rumor of her deeds fueling the conviction that she must be caught. For Gideon, the hunt is not abstract, it is personal, and with each passing day his frustration sharpens into obsession. Yet beneath his rigidity, there are cracks that Ciccarelli begins to show. Gideon is not untouched by doubt. He senses something shifting in the air of the city, something larger than the isolated missions of a single rebel. In the small moments of this chapter, the reader glimpses the isolation that comes with his role. He is feared, respected, but never loved, and that solitude only feeds his hunger to prove himself indispensable. Gideon sees patterns in the chaos, connections others dismiss, and though he cannot yet name it, his instincts are beginning to drift toward Rune Winters. He notices her brightness in society circles, the way she commands attention, and somewhere in the back of his mind suspicion begins to stir. Chapter 7 sets Gideon firmly on his collision course with Rune, building the sense that the walls of the chase are drawing tighter around them both. Chapter 8 Rune. This chapter returns us to Rune, and the strain of her double life presses down more heavily than ever. The city around her glitters with its usual veneer of luxury, but Rune's perception of it has shifted. Every ballroom, every corridor of whispered gossip feels haunted by danger. The Bloodguard's presence is tightening, and she knows Gideon Hawthorne is watching, though she cannot always see him. This awareness makes the mask she wears feel heavier, every smile sharpened into a test of endurance. She thrives in this world because she must, charming the nobility with wit and grace, but her inner voice is consumed by the knowledge of the witches still trapped, still waiting for her intervention. Her every gesture at these gatherings becomes strategy, her conversations maps of information that might be twisted into tools of resistance. The chapter also lingers on her emotional exhaustion. Rune is courageous, but she is not unbreakable, and here Ciccarelli allows us to see the weight of her fear and loneliness more fully. She knows her role as the Crimson Moth cannot last forever. Eventually the Guard will adapt, eventually someone will see through her glittering disguise. Yet even with that inevitability pressing on her, she cannot imagine stepping back. The cause is larger than her, and though her body aches and her spirit strains, she will not stop. This mixture of resolve and fragility gives Rune her depth. She is no flawless heroine, but a woman choosing again and again to fight in spite of the cost. Chapter 8 sets the stage for the tightening noose. Rune still holds the mask in place, but Gideon's shadow is nearer and the danger of discovery hums like a storm in the distance. Chapter 9 Gideon. In this chapter, we find Gideon deepening his fixation on the Crimson Moth, his every instinct tuned to the trail she leaves behind. For him, this is not just another assignment but a matter of pride and principle. The Bloodguard exists to maintain control, and as long as the Moth evades capture, she stands as a living rebuke to their authority. Gideon feels this failure personally. Each rumor of her exploits cuts at the order he has sworn to uphold, and each whisper of hope she inspires in others gnaws at his sense of control. In this chapter, he begins to see her not as a faceless fugitive but as a deliberate, cunning opponent. He studies her movements, traces the rhythm of her rescues, and starts to imagine her not simply as a criminal but as a strategist, and one who is growing bolder with every success. And yet, beneath his conviction, there is an edge of unease. Gideon tells himself that his pursuit is purely professional, yet the Moth occupies his thoughts in ways he cannot entirely explain. His instincts, honed by years of training, suggest that she moves within circles he knows, perhaps even circles of privilege. This thought unsettles him, for it hints at corruption within the very society he protects, but it also draws his attention to faces he would otherwise dismiss. Rune Winters drifts at the margins of his mind, too polished, too clever, too composed to be only what she appears. Though he cannot yet admit it aloud, suspicion begins to brush against fascination, and the rigid lines between hunter and quarry begin to blur. Chapter 9 heightens the inevitability of their collision, showing Gideon circling ever closer to a truth he cannot yet name. Chapter 10 Rune. This chapter opens with Rune caught once more between the hollow glitter of her public life and the dangerous pull of her secret mission. The ballrooms around her gleam with chandeliers, the air heavy with perfume and laughter, yet Rune's mind is elsewhere. Every conversation she has, every smile she offers is weighed against the risks she must calculate as the Crimson Moth. She listens closely to the careless chatter of the powerful, sifting gossip for fragments of truth she can turn into intelligence. To those around her she appears effortless, but the reader feels how tightly wound she is beneath the mask. Her laughter rings out on cue, her posture is perfect, yet she carries the constant hum of dread, as though Gideon's eyes might be on her at any moment. This chapter sharpens the emotional stakes as well. Rune is haunted not just by fear of discovery, but by the mounting toll of living in two worlds. The Crimson Moth gives her purpose, yet it also strips her of rest and intimacy. She cannot confide in anyone, even those she saves know her only as a symbol, never as a person. The isolation grows heavier, and Ciccarelli makes us feel how courage and loneliness can exist side by side. Still, Rune endures. She takes in every detail of her surroundings, filing away careless boasts, whispered schemes and political shifts that might one day tip the balance in her favor. Chapter 10 reminds us that Rune's greatest weapon is not just her magic, but her ability to transform her performance into strategy, turning every superficial interaction into another thread in her rebellion's tapestry. Chapter 11 Rune. We are drawn closer to the heart of Rune's private world, where the veneer of charm begins to strain under the weight of her choices. The chapter pulses with quiet tension, not because of an immediate confrontation, but because of the constant awareness that danger presses in on every side. Rune's role in society continues to demand perfection. Her wit must sparkle, her movements must remain fluid, her mask must never slip, but beneath that glittering surface exhaustion gnaws at her. She has begun to feel the sharp edges of isolation more keenly. Surrounded by admirers who see only the persona she projects, she wonders how much longer she can bear the solitude of her secret self. Ciccarelli captures the weariness of a double life so vividly here, that every gesture Rune makes feels weighted with both beauty and burden. Yet the chapter is not only about weariness, it is also about resolve. Rune knows the cost of faltering, and the faces of the witches she has saved as well as those she failed to reach drive her forward. Her rebellion is not grandiose but intimate, small victories snatched from the jaws of certain death, each one a reminder that hope can still exist in a world suffocating under the Blood Guard's rule. The way Rune calculates, improvises, and endures highlights the complexity of her courage. She is not fearless, she is terrified, and yet she moves anyway, weaving her dread into determination. Chapter 11 deepens our understanding of Rune not just as a mask or a rebel, but as a woman grappling with her humanity in the face of impossible stakes, holding herself together even as the walls close in tighter around her. Chapter 12 Rune. This chapter heightens the peril of Rune's existence, placing her once again at the crossroads of danger and disguise. The chapter begins with the suffocating presence of the Blood Guard thickening across the city, and Rune feels it in every step she takes. Her disguise as a glittering socialite is becoming harder to sustain as suspicion builds in the air. The very spaces that once offered her cover, the lavish ballrooms and salons where nobles preen and gossip, now feel like cages laced with hidden traps. Rune must sparkle brighter, laugh louder, and conceal her unease with greater finesse, all while knowing the guard's eyes are scanning the crowd for any flicker of truth. Ciccarelli uses these details to pull us deeper into her inner conflict. The stronger the mask, the greater the toll it takes on her spirit. Yet Rune's fire refuses to dim. She knows that her cause cannot afford her collapse, and so she sharpens herself against the fear, shaping it into resolve. The Crimson Moth's work continues, each act of defiance another thread of hope for witches who would otherwise be lost to the noose or the pyre. We see how carefully Rune plans her rescues, how she reads a room not just for social advantage but for intelligence. The careless words of a lord, the drunk boasts of a guard, the flicker of resentment in a servant's tone. Everything becomes a weapon in her arsenal. Chapter 12 reminds us of the paradox at the heart of Rune's existence. She must shine in the light to be invisible in the dark. It is a role she hates and needs in equal measure, and it leaves her standing on a knife's edge between brilliance and destruction. Chapter 13 Rune. We settle deeper into Rune's private conflict, and the chapter breathes with the tension of a woman stretched between survival and purpose. She continues to move through society with the flawless brilliance that has made her untouchable, the quick wit, the perfectly timed laughter, the easy elegance that keeps suspicion at bay. Yet in this chapter, Ciccarelli sharpens the sense that Rune herself is beginning to feel the cracks in her mask. It is not that she has grown careless, but rather that her exhaustion is mounting, and with it comes the terrifying awareness that her double life cannot hold forever. The ballrooms glitter around her like cages gilded in gold, and even as she plays her part flawlessly, her heart is listening for the rustle of the guard, the shadow of Gideon, the whisper of danger that never leaves her. What drives her forward here is not just her own survival, but her determination to keep hope alive for others. Rune reflects on the witches she has already saved, fragile victories that remind her of why she endures, and she steels herself with the knowledge that without her many more will be lost. The Crimson Moth has become larger than her own name, a symbol that flickers in the darkness like a promise that the guard cannot extinguish. And yet, the more that symbol grows, the lonelier Rune becomes. Her victories must remain secret, her true self unspoken, her fears carried alone. Chapter 13 crystallizes the paradox of her life. She is at once powerful and deeply isolated, capable of saving others but unable to be fully known herself. The chapter closes on that knife edge, Rune bracing herself for the next move, knowing the walls of suspicion are creeping ever closer. Chapter 14 Gideon. In Chapter 14 we are pulled back into Gideon's world, and with it comes the unyielding discipline of the Blood Guard. Where Rune's chapters shimmer with the tension of performance and secrecy, Gideon's are all about precision, every observation, every choice, made with the cold logic of a man trained to see deception as weakness. Yet the Crimson Moth unsettles him. Each time she escapes, it is not just a failure of duty, but a wound to his pride, and the ripple of defiance she spreads through the city gnaws at him. Gideon thrives on control, and here Ciccarelli lets us feel his frustration sharpen into obsession. His mind begins to spin webs of patterns, trying to piece together where the moth will strike next, and beneath that hunt is a restless energy that he cannot quite name. This chapter also deepens the complexity of Gideon's character. He is no mindless soldier, his eyes are too sharp, his instincts too keen. He begins to sense the subtler currents at play, the whispers that move through society's upper circles, the inconsistencies in certain alibis, the unusual boldness in Rune Winter's gaze. Though he has no proof, Rune lingers at the edge of his suspicion, not because she has made a mistake, but because something about her feels too carefully constructed. Ciccarelli plants the seeds of inevitability here, Gideon circling closer to the truth, Rune's mask pressed by his attention, both of them caught in a tightening orbit. Chapter 14 sets the hunter firmly on the moth's trail, sharpening the tension of their eventual collision, while hinting that the lines between duty and something far more dangerous are already beginning to blur. Chapter 15 Rune. This chapter places Rune under a sharper kind of pressure, the kind that cannot be measured only by the presence of guards or the threat of exposure. It is the pressure of Gideon Hawthorne's attention, an attention she feels even when he is not in the room. The knowledge that the hunter is drawing nearer makes her performance in society ever more fraught, every word she speaks balanced on a blade's edge. She still sparkles, still charms, but beneath the polish her nerves strain like a bowstring drawn too tight. Ciccarelli lets us feel that dissonance, the outward brilliance and the inward storm, until every social interaction carries with it the weight of survival. Rune knows that the mask must hold, yet she feels it slipping in small, dangerous ways, a glance that lingers too long, a silence that comes half a second too late. At the same time, Rune's inner life grows more complicated. Gideon is not just her hunter. He has become an enigma, a presence that stirs something she does not want to name. She knows she should see him only as the enemy, yet his sharpness, his discipline, the steadiness of his gaze, all of it presses against her resolve in unsettling ways. This quiet thread of attraction, unwelcome though it is, makes her burden heavier. Still, her purpose anchors her. Each time she remembers the faces of the witches she has saved, she recommits herself to the fight, reminding herself that her personal confusion cannot outweigh the cause. Chapter 15 captures the paradox of Rune at this stage in the story. The Crimson Moth is more determined than ever, even as the woman behind the mask is beginning to crack under the twin forces of exhaustion and dangerous desire. Chapter 16 Rune. The weight of Rune's double life is sharpened, until it feels nearly unbearable. The chapter opens with her again moving through the rituals of her society role, the gowns and jewels, the endless chatter of nobles who have the luxury of blindness. On the surface, she is dazzling as ever, her tongue quick, her smile precise, but within her runs a current of fatigue so deep it feels almost physical. Every night spent as the Crimson Moth robs her of sleep, every rescue leaves a scar on her body and mind, and every party demands that she bury her exhaustion beneath a glittering mask. Ciccarelli shows us how close Rune is to the edge, yet also how impossible it is for her to stop. The rebellion has become more than a cause. It is her identity, her lifeline, the very reason she endures the suffocating performances demanded of her. The danger here is heightened by proximity. Rune knows Gideon is circling closer, that his gaze has grown keener, and she feels it in every interaction. His presence gnaws at her, not only because he represents the threat of exposure, but because he complicates her emotions in ways she despises. He is sharp, controlled, utterly unlike the careless nobles who surround her, and she cannot ignore him no matter how much she wishes to. This unwanted awareness threads through her thoughts even as she focuses on her mission. Chapter 16 captures Rune at her most human, exhausted, lonely, afraid, yet still defiant, still unwilling to bow to fear. It leaves us with the sense of a heroine fraying at the edges but burning fiercely at the core, a flame that the blood guard cannot yet extinguish, no matter how close Gideon comes. Chapter 17 Gideon. This chapter opens with Gideon entrenched in the methodical pursuit that defines him, but his thoughts betray a growing restlessness. The Crimson Moth continues to elude the blood guard, and every escape deepens his sense of failure. For Gideon, this is more than professional duty. It is a test of his identity, proof that his discipline and loyalty can hold against the cunning of an enemy who refuses to be caught. The moth has become a shadow he cannot ignore, her defiance a thorn lodged deep beneath his skin. He pores over reports, listens for discrepancies in testimony, and scours the city for threads of her presence. Yet what haunts him most is not the evidence but the absence of it, the precision with which she leaves so little behind. To him, her very elusiveness feels like a challenge, as though she is daring him to catch her. Rune Winters lingers at the edge of his thoughts, though he will not allow himself to admit why. She is too polished, too poised, her brilliance too carefully curated, and it unsettles him. His instincts whisper that she hides something, though logic resists the conclusion. In her he sees both distraction and puzzle, and this duality irritates him more than he will confess. What Ciccarelli does so well in this chapter is expose the tension between Gideon's rigid loyalty and the flickers of intuition that threaten to pull him off course. The hunter tells himself that this is about law, about order, about restoring control. Yet the truth pressing at the edges of his mind is that the Crimson Moth has already become personal, and Rune, dazzling and untouchable, is beginning to blur the clarity of his pursuit. Chapter 17 leaves us with a hunter tightening his net, even as his own instincts tug him toward dangerous entanglement. Chapter 18 Rune. This chapter pulls us deep into Rune's private storm, where the fragile threads of her double life are stretched almost to breaking. The chapter finds her preparing for yet another act of resistance, her body and spirit running on the reserves of a will that refuses to falter. Ciccarelli lingers on the ritual of her magic, the careful writing of blood spells across her skin, the whispered invocations that blur her presence, and these moments remind us of the cost of every step she takes. Magic is not free. It exacts its toll from her body, and the more she leans on it, the more she risks burning herself out. And yet, Rune does not hesitate. Each charm she carves into her flesh, each night she spends cloaked in secrecy, is another chance to save lives. But beneath her resolve, the fear is undeniable. Rune can feel Gideon's presence like a shadow just beyond her vision, a pressure she cannot escape no matter where she turns. His suspicion is growing sharper, his gaze more penetrating, and Rune knows that one mistake could collapse everything she has built. What unsettles her most is not only the danger he represents, but the strange pull she feels whenever their paths cross. That flicker of awareness, unwelcome, dangerous, and persistent, haunts her, making every encounter more perilous. In this chapter, Rune's defiance is matched by vulnerability. She is brave enough to risk herself again and again, but human enough to feel the crushing solitude of carrying her rebellion alone. Chapter 18 leaves us with the sense that her mask, though still intact, is beginning to crack under the weight of Gideon's proximity and the cost of her own relentless courage. Chapter 19 Gideon. We find Gideon tightening the net, his pursuit of the Crimson Moth no longer a distant duty, but an obsession sharpening with every failure. The city hums with whispers of her exploits, witches freed in the night, guards misled, executions thwarted, and each rumor gnaws at him like a personal insult. For Gideon, order is not just a principle, it is his anchor, and the Moth's defiance is a disruption that threatens to unravel everything he stands for. His superiors see a rebel, Gideon sees an opponent whose cunning mirrors his own discipline, a phantom whose every escape feels like a deliberate taunt. He pores over patterns others overlook, replaying events in his mind, convinced that if he studies long enough the truth will emerge. And that truth, unspoken though it remains, edges closer to Rune Winters. She lingers in his thoughts not because of evidence but because of intuition, that quiet voice trained by years of hunting liars and traitors. Rune's brilliance in society feels too careful, her poise too rehearsed, and though he has no proof he cannot dismiss the dissonance. What unsettles him most is not just the suspicion but the fascination it breeds, the way her presence lingers in his mind when it should not. Ciccarelli lets us feel Gideon's inner conflict, the disciplined hunter who insists this is about justice and order, and the man who cannot quite sever thought from desire. Chapter 19 sets Gideon more firmly on Rune's trail, his loyalty and obsession twining together, the chase transforming into something dangerously personal. Chapter 20 Rune. Rune's sense of entrapment deepens in this chapter, placing her squarely in the space where her glittering mask and her secret mission begin to clash. She continues to move through the halls of society with practiced grace, dazzling with her laughter, her wit, her carefully measured charm, but the performance no longer feels effortless. Every glance feels loaded, every word tested, because she knows Gideon is circling closer. His presence has become a constant pressure, one that makes her mask feel as fragile as glass. The very gatherings that once gave her cover now feel like traps, gilded cages where one misstep could unravel her entire life. And yet, Rune's determination does not falter. The faces of the witches she has saved, and those she still longs to save, burn in her mind with unrelenting force. They are her anchor, the reason she endures the suffocating charade of noble society. What unsettles her most is not the danger alone, but the strange current she feels whenever Gideon is near. His gaze lingers too long, his sharpness cuts through her practiced charm, and Rune feels the weight of being truly seen, something she both craves and fears. Ciccarelli captures this paradox with nuance. Rune is a woman fighting fiercely for her cause, but she is also a young woman haunted by the unwanted stirrings of connection with the very man who hunts her. Chapter 20 leaves her standing at the threshold of discovery, her courage steady but her mask dangerously close to slipping. Chapter 21 Gideon. We go back to Gideon's mind, where the pursuit of the Crimson Moth has become less a duty and more a consuming fixation. Each report of her defiance, each whisper of another witch saved, fuels his determination with a mix of pride wounded and order threatened. Gideon thrives on discipline, on precision, but here we see him straining against the limits of both. The moth is not careless, she leaves behind no traces, no simple mistakes to exploit, and this elusiveness gnaws at him. He begins to study her movements as if she were an adversary on the battlefield, charting the rhythm of her interventions and building patterns from scraps that others dismiss as coincidence. To Gideon, her cleverness is both infuriating and fascinating, a mystery he is determined to crack. And always at the edge of his thoughts lies Rune Winters. He will not admit it openly, even to himself, but his instincts keep circling her. There is something about her poise that feels crafted, something in her brilliance that seems too perfect to be wholly natural. She unsettles him in a way no one else does. His training tells him to follow evidence, but his instincts whisper a different truth, and in Gideon those instincts are rarely wrong. What unsettles him even more is the pull he feels in her presence, not only suspicion but a spark of something he dares not name, for it blurs the clear line between hunter and quarry. Chapter 21 makes clear that the chase is tightening, with both Rune and Gideon locked in a dangerous orbit, neither fully aware of how much the other is already consuming their thoughts. Chapter 22 Rune. This chapter plunges us back into Rune's clandestine world, where the stakes of her rebellion are measured in blood, risk and silence. She prepares herself with a ritual both familiar and costly, carving a spell into her own skin, the crimson lines of blood forming words of invisibility. The charm she calls Ghost Walker does not make her vanish, but it shifts the gaze of others away from her, cloaking her in forgetfulness. Even in this small detail, Ciccarelli shows the weight of her defiance. Rune cannot act without sacrificing something of herself. Each spell leaves her weaker, yet each mission demands more. She leaves her horse lady behind at a safe distance and moves toward the abandoned mine, where the Bloodguard's presence is marked by torches and a watchful sentry. The air hums with danger, but Rune slips forward with the steadiness of someone who has danced with fear so long it has become part of her rhythm. Inside the mine the atmosphere presses close, the wooden beams creaking under their own age, the shadows thick with silence. Rune's senses sharpen, her mind cataloguing every sound and shift in the air, every possible escape route should the Ghostwalker charm falter. Here the isolation of her mission deepens, no allies at her side, no one to share the weight of what she risks. She carries the rebellion alone, and that solitude feels heavier than any physical threat. And yet, even in this suffocating space, Rune is unyielding. Her purpose, to save the condemned, to keep the spark of magic alive in a world determined to stamp it out, keeps her moving forward. Chapter 22 embodies both the fragility and the strength of Rune's defiance, showing us a heroine who bleeds for her cause, who hides in shadows and yet burns with light. Chapter 23 Rune. This chapter carries Rune deeper into the peril of her task, her every step inside the mine threaded with the kind of tension that leaves no room for error. The Ghostwalker charm veils her, bending attention away, but Rune knows better than to mistake it for invulnerability. One wrong sound, one unlucky glance, and the illusion will break. Ciccarelli makes us feel the intensity of Rune's focus here, the way she reads the guard's movements, the rhythm of the torchlight, the creak of timber overhead, as though the world itself has become an elaborate trap she must outwit. Rune moves not with recklessness but with deliberate precision, her courage sharpened by the knowledge that failure would mean not just her capture, but the death of those she has come to rescue. This chapter also lingers on her inner struggle. Beneath the control of her movements, Rune feels the toll of what she is doing, the weakness from her bloodletting, the exhaustion pressing into her bones, the constant fear of discovery that leaves her heart hammering in her chest. Yet she presses forward, driven by the memories of the condemned witches who rely on her. Their faces haunt her but also strengthen her resolve. What makes this chapter so compelling is the quiet humanity that runs beneath the danger. Rune is not fearless, but she chooses to act in spite of her fear, and that choice defines her more than any mask or spell. Chapter 23 captures the raw essence of her rebellion, fragile, costly, and yet utterly unyielding in its refusal to let hope die. Chapter 24, Gideon. This chapter places us once again in Gideon's world, where order and suspicion shape every thought. The Crimson Moth has become more than a rebel in his eyes. She is an adversary who challenges his identity as a loyal soldier of the Blood Guard. Each night she escapes tightens the knot of frustration within him, and each rumor of witches saved sparks his conviction that she is undermining not only the Guard's authority, but the stability of the city itself. For Gideon, this pursuit has evolved into something far more personal than duty. His reputation, his pride, even his sense of self are now entwined with the task of unmasking and destroying her. Ciccarelli paints his mindset with the precision of a hunter studying his prey. His discipline is unbroken, but obsession hums just beneath it. Rune Winters, though he will not admit it aloud, increasingly occupies his thoughts. There is a dissonance in her presence that he cannot shake. She dazzles in society, but her brilliance feels deliberate, almost rehearsed, as though she is hiding something behind the glitter. Gideon cannot prove it, but his instincts, honed by years of rooting out deception, circle her again and again. What troubles him most is the flicker of something beyond suspicion, a fascination, a pull he knows he should resist but cannot quite sever. In her, duty and desire are beginning to blur, and that tension unsettles the certainty he has built his life upon. Chapter 24 intensifies the sense of inevitability. The hunter is closing in, not only with suspicion but with emotions that complicate his pursuit, and Rune's mask grows more precarious with every step he takes. Chapter 25, Rune. Rune enters Chapter 25 with the awareness that the walls around her are tightening. Gideon's eyes seem to linger longer, his questions carry sharper edges, and the Blood Guard is prowling through the city with renewed vigor. Every outing feels like stepping into a trap she must outwit, every smile at court a mask she must wear with flawless precision. Beneath the glitter of gowns and the rhythm of waltzes, Rune carries a pulse of fear and determination. She knows she cannot falter. The witches she shelters depend on her, the networks she has built could crumble with one mistake. Yet the act of living a double life is beginning to press heavily against her chest, and Ciccarelli allows the reader to feel that suffocating tension. Rune is not only fleeing capture, she is holding together two irreconcilable selves, one of which must eventually consume the other. In this chapter, the strain of deception touches her in unexpected ways. She finds herself thinking about Gideon not just as an enemy but as a man, someone whose intensity both threatens and unsettles her. It is a dangerous distraction, yet it surfaces again and again, like a shadow that insists on being seen. Rune steels herself against these thoughts, reminding herself of the witches whose lives hang in the balance, but the heart does not obey as swiftly as the mind. Chapter 25 deepens the portrait of a heroine balancing on a knife's edge, the perfect society lady admired by all, and the outlaw who slips into the night to defy the guard. The closer Gideon draws, the more perilous her masquerade becomes, and the more her own emotions threaten to betray her carefully guarded secrets. Chapter 26, Gideon. Chapter 26 returns us to Gideon, who is sharpening his focus as though Rune's every movement is a thread he must untangle. His pursuit of the Crimson Moth is no longer about duty alone, it is about proving to himself that he is not being outmaneuvered, not being fooled. Yet there is a flicker of unease beneath his discipline. He has begun to sense that the rebellion is not just a band of faceless witches in the shadows, It has intelligence, heart, and cunning behind it. That realization unsettles his clean narrative of order versus chaos. When he studies the details of the Crimson Moth's defiance, he feels a strange recognition, as though her boldness mirrors something long buried in himself. Gideon, who has spent years crafting loyalty into an armor, now struggles to reconcile that armor with the gnawing curiosity growing inside him. Rune Winters is increasingly at the center of that struggle. He notices her presence at gatherings, how she seems both entirely at ease and yet somehow set apart, how her laughter feels genuine but her eyes often betray a storm. He cannot name the connection, but it needles at him relentlessly. Each time he thinks of her, suspicion and fascination blur together, creating a tension he cannot dispel. He tries to convince himself that this is the instinct of a hunter circling prey, but the truth runs deeper. Rune stirs something human in him, something his rigid loyalty to the guard does not allow. Chapter 26 captures this friction vividly. Gideon is still the soldier, precise and relentless, but beneath the surface, cracks are forming in his certainty. The closer he draws to Rune, the more his pursuit becomes not only about catching the Crimson Moth, but about uncovering truths within himself he has long been trained to silence. Chapter 27 Rune. Rune begins Chapter 27, under the weight of a storm she can feel gathering on all sides. The web of her lies, once so carefully spun, is trembling under Gideon's growing scrutiny and the Blood Guard's heightened patrols. Every social gathering feels like a stage where she must deliver a flawless performance, and every secret mission for the Crimson Moth demands that she vanish into the shadows with equal mastery. The danger is palpable, yet Rune carries it with poise, refusing to let fear bend her resolve. She knows too well what is at stake, the safety of witches hunted like vermin, the fragile hope that resistance still flickers in a city suffocated by tyranny. Still, her thoughts betray her at times, circling back to Gideon, the man who hunts her and the man she cannot stop noticing. It is a paradox she cannot untangle, one that pulls her toward both ruin and revelation. Her inner conflict sharpens in this chapter, especially as she feels the strain of maintaining her dual identity. Rune is not merely deceiving acquaintances at glittering soirée, she is deceiving herself. The mask of the polished society lady begins to feel as permanent as the persona of the Crimson Moth, and she wonders if she can truly separate the two any longer. To be Rune is to be both, and that realization frightens her as much as it empowers her. The attraction she senses toward Gideon only intensifies this fracture. She tells herself it is foolishness, a distraction that could undo everything she has built, yet the heart continues to betray the mind. Chapter 27 deepens the reader's understanding of her peril, not only from the guard's blades but from the war inside her chest. Rune's path grows narrower, the risks higher, and the possibility of discovery looms like a shadow that lengthens with each passing moment. Chapter 28 Rune. In Chapter 28, Rune is forced to navigate a night laced with both splendor and suspicion. The ballroom is alive with music, laughter, and candlelight, but beneath the glitter lies the unmistakable presence of danger. Every step she takes, every smile she offers, feels like a gamble. She knows Gideon's eyes are never far, watching her with the steady focus of a man trained to notice what others overlook. Rune cannot falter, not here, not now, and yet the dual weight of maintaining her facade and protecting her secret identity grows almost unbearable. The beauty of the evening becomes its own kind of cruelty, reminding her that the life she performs is not the life she truly lives. This chapter also presses on Rune's loneliness. Though she moves among friends and admirers, she is more isolated than ever. No one at her side can share the truth of who she is or the risks she takes each night. The only person who seems to truly see her is Gideon, but his gaze is both a danger and a temptation. She senses in him a complexity that mirrors her own, and though she resists the thought, some part of her longs for the understanding that might exist between them. That longing terrifies her. Still, it burns quietly, like an ember she cannot put out. Chapter 28 balances the glittering tension of Rune's outward life with the raw, unspoken truths inside her, painting her as a woman caught between two worlds that cannot coexist. Each step she takes in this dance of deception brings her closer to exposure, or to something even more dangerous, vulnerability. Chapter 29, Gideon. This chapter draws us back into Gideon's sharp, disciplined perspective, where duty is both a compass and a chain. He walks among the same glittering ballrooms as Rune, but where others see beauty and celebration, he sees patterns, deceptions, and threats. Every gesture is scrutinized, every word catalogued, each smile weighed against the possibility of treachery. And at the heart of it all, his thoughts keep returning to Rune Winters. She unsettles him in ways he cannot name. There is a polish to her, yes, but also something beneath it, a flicker of fire he has not seen in the others who orbit society's grand stage. The more he tries to dismiss it, the more it gnaws at him. His instincts whisper that she is hiding something, though his heart resists the cold logic of that suspicion. Gideon's inner conflict deepens in this chapter. On one hand, his training demands suspicion. The Crimson Moth has been too bold, too effective, to remain hidden without help from someone embedded deep within society. Rune fits the pattern in ways he cannot ignore. On the other hand, his human impulses complicate the clean lines of duty. She fascinates him, disarms him, even stirs something like admiration. It is a dangerous entanglement, one that threatens to unravel the steel loyalty he has built his identity upon. Still, Gideon convinces himself he can balance both. He can remain the dutiful hunter while indulging the pull he feels toward her. Yet Ciccarelli makes it clear that this balance is precarious, that Gideon is standing at the edge of a precipice where the pursuit of the Crimson Moth and his fixation on Rune are no longer separate paths but one and the same. Chapter 30, Gideon. In Chapter 30, Gideon's resolve sharpens into something almost relentless. The city is tightening its guard, whispers of the Crimson Moth spreading like fire, and yet each mission he undertakes only deepens his sense that she is always one step ahead. That failure weighs heavily on him. For Gideon, this is not simply about protecting the realm or obeying orders, it has become a matter of personal honor. To be outmaneuvered, to be deceived, cuts against the very discipline that defines his life. And still, in his restless nights and tense days, the image that rises again and again is Rune. She is never far from his mind. The elegance of her presence at court, the intensity of her gaze, the way she seems to carry secrets in the arch of her smile. He tells himself it is suspicion alone that fuels his thoughts, but beneath that justification lies something far more dangerous. The paradox of his emotions deepens as he considers what Rune might represent. If she is innocent, then his fascination is a weakness that could cost him everything. But if she is guilty, if she is in fact tied to the rebellion he hunts, then she becomes both his greatest failure and his greatest temptation. That thought alone unsettles him more than he cares to admit. He finds himself rehearsing both futures, one where he unmasks her and fulfills his duty to the guard, and another where the truth would force him to confront emotions he has never allowed himself to feel. Ciccarelli frames this chapter with a sense of inevitability, as though Gideon is being drawn down a path where choice will no longer be possible. For now, he convinces himself that his heart is secondary to his mission. Yet the lines between hunter and man, between loyalty and longing, are already beginning to blur beyond recognition. Chapter 31, Rune. This chapter pulls us back into Rune's world, where her double life grows more perilous with each passing day. The network she has built as the Crimson Moth demands constant vigilance, but what unsettles her most now is Gideon's looming presence. His questions cut closer to the truth. His gaze lingers as though he can see through the glittering mask she so carefully wears. Rune feels as though she is dancing along the edge of a blade. One wrong step, one misplaced word, and everything she has sacrificed to protect will collapse. Yet she cannot simply withdraw, for every night the cries of witches in hiding remind her of the stakes. She has bound herself to their cause, and abandoning them would mean abandoning herself. Her inner struggle takes on new intensity as she confronts the danger of her own emotions. Gideon is not merely a threat to her freedom, He is a threat to her heart. She catches herself watching him with the same attentiveness he shows her, noticing the discipline in his bearing, the shadows in his eyes, the man hidden beneath the hunter's armor. This awareness unsettles her, even frightens her, because desire feels like betrayal, not only of her cause, but of the self she has worked so hard to protect. Still, the pull remains, undeniable and unshakable. Rune's thoughts are filled with contradictions: the fire of rebellion, the fragility of secrecy, the ache of longing. Chapter 31 reveals her as a woman both powerful and vulnerable, fighting not just against an oppressive system, but against the dangerous beating of her own heart. Chapter 32 Gideon. We're immersed in Gideon's restless pursuit, his mind circling the puzzle of the Crimson Moth with unyielding intensity. He has been trained to treat every mission as a matter of order and precision, yet this one has become personal in a way that unsettles him. Each time the moth eludes capture, he feels the sting of failure, not only as a soldier but as a man whose instincts should never falter. The city is restless under the guards' vigilance, but what Gideon sees more clearly than most is how the rebellion has become not just an external threat, but a shadow creeping through the cracks of his own certainty. Beneath the steel of his discipline, he feels something loosening, something human that he has long been taught to suppress. And then there is Rune Winters. He tells himself she is a subject of suspicion, no more than a glittering piece on the chessboard he is determined to master. Yet his thoughts betray him. He remembers the curve of her smile, the fire hidden behind her carefully chosen words, the way she seems both part of society and apart from it. This duality draws him like a flame, even as his training warns that fascination is the first step toward ruin. The question he cannot answer, and perhaps does not want to, is whether his instincts draw him toward her as prey or as something far more complicated. Chapter 32 leaves Gideon in a state of tension he cannot resolve, caught between duty and desire, suspicion and longing. Each step he takes brings him closer to discovery, but also closer to a truth that could shatter the man he believes himself to be. Chapter 33 Rune. Rune steps into Chapter 33, carrying the heavy knowledge that her carefully woven facade is fraying. The world of silk gowns, gilded halls and whispered conversations has always been a mask for her deeper purpose, but lately that mask feels dangerously thin. Gideon's presence presses in on her, not only as the relentless hunter but as a man whose gaze unsettles her in ways she cannot dismiss. At court she can feel him watching, silent, unyielding, almost as if he is searching not just for a traitor but for her. Rune's every movement becomes an act of theater, each smile a shield, each word a calculated step in a dance she cannot afford to misstep. Yet beneath the performance, her heart pounds with the knowledge that the Crimson Moth cannot remain hidden forever. The strain of duality deepens her inner conflict. She longs for a moment of honesty, a space where she can lay down her masks and simply be. But honesty is a luxury she cannot afford. Even her closest allies see only fragments of who she truly is, and Gideon, of all people, is the last person she can trust with her truth. Still, when his eyes meet hers, she feels the flicker of recognition, as though he senses more than he admits. It is dangerous, intoxicating, and unbearably complicated. Rune steels herself with reminders of what she fights for, the lives of witches, the freedom of those hunted for what they are. And yet, the war inside her is just as fierce as the one she wages in the shadows. Chapter 33 shows Rune not just as the daring Crimson Moth, but as a woman standing on the precipice of discovery and desire, torn between love, loyalty, and survival. Chapter 34 Gideon. This chapter brings us back into Gideon's tightly coiled world, where his instincts sharpen against the shadows of doubt he can no longer ignore. The hunt for the Crimson Moth has consumed his every waking thought, not only because she defies the guard with audacity, but because she unsettles him on a level he cannot explain away with duty. His investigations trace patterns that lead him closer to high society's inner circles, and though he has no proof, Rune Winters rises again and again in his mind as a name he cannot dismiss. Her elegance, her ease in the glittering halls, Her ability to vanish from notice just when it matters most, all of it fuels a suspicion he dares not voice even to himself. Yet beneath suspicion lies something far more dangerous: desire. Gideon has built his life on discipline, loyalty, and the ruthless suppression of weakness. But Rune is a weakness he cannot banish. Her presence lingers long after she leaves a room, haunting his thoughts with equal parts fascination and fury. He tells himself this pull is strategic, a hunter's attunement to his quarry, but the truth gnaws at him: it is not only the Crimson Moth he chases but the woman herself. Ciccarelli frames his turmoil with quiet intensity, showing how Gideon's identity is beginning to fracture under the strain. The soldier and the man are at war, and each step he takes toward Rune brings him closer to a reckoning he cannot avoid. Chapter 34 deepens the sense that Gideon's pursuit is no longer a matter of law but of fate, and that both he and Rune are being drawn into a collision neither can escape. Chapter 35 Rune. We're immersed in Rune's precarious balancing act, where every hour feels like walking across a blade suspended above an abyss. The whispers of rebellion grow louder, the guard sharpens its vigilance, and through it all Gideon's presence bears down on her like a weight she cannot shake. Rune knows his suspicions are closing in, though he has not yet spoken them aloud. The thought of his gaze cutting through her carefully woven lies fills her with dread, yet it also stirs something deeper, a curiosity she dares not name. She fears him as the hunter who could undo her, but she also aches with the dangerous sense that he sees her more clearly than anyone else ever has. That duality is unbearable, and yet she cannot look away. Her inner voice, usually a steady compass, wavers as she questions whether she can continue playing both roles: the glittering noblewoman admired by society, and the shadowed savior who slips into the night as the Crimson Moth. Each role demands sacrifices, each pulls at different pieces of her soul, and together they threaten to tear her apart. Still, Rune finds strength in remembering why she began: the faces of witches spared from the guard's cruelty, the promise that resistance is not yet extinguished. But even as she steels herself, she cannot escape the thought of Gideon. His nearness complicates everything, turning the battlefield of the city into something far more intimate, a war of masks and gazes, secrets and unspoken truths. Chapter 35 portrays Rune as both powerful and vulnerable, her courage sharpened by the constant risk of exposure, her heart torn between survival and the longing to be seen. Chapter 36 Gideon. This chapter reveals Gideon tightening his grip on the hunt, even as his inner conflict gnaws at him. The Crimson Moth continues to evade capture, but the pattern of her defiance sharpens into something unmistakable. Gideon feels her presence everywhere now, in the whispers of the city, in the hidden traces left behind after each daring act of rebellion, and most disturbingly, in the way Rune Winters lingers in his thoughts. He cannot prove she is connected, yet suspicion has transformed into obsession. Every word she speaks feels weighted with double meaning, every glance laden with secrets he is determined to uncover. To admit it openly would be dangerous, but in his private mind, Gideon knows he is circling closer to the truth than ever before. What unsettles him most, however, is not the threat she represents but the desire she awakens in him. Gideon has built a life around discipline, loyalty, and the suppression of temptation, yet Rune tempts him in ways no enemy ever has. The soldier in him demands cold efficiency, to see her as nothing more than a target. But the man beneath the uniform feels the spark of something forbidden, something he both craves and fears. That tension corrodes the certainty he has always relied on, leaving him divided between duty and longing. Chapter 36 heightens this fracture in his character, showing how the pursuit of the Crimson Moth has become entangled with emotions that weaken his resolve. Gideon is no longer hunting only an enemy of the guard, he is pursuing a truth about himself, one that could undo everything he has been trained to be. Chapter 37 Rune. In Chapter 37, Rune feels the pressure of Gideon's pursuit more keenly than ever. The Blood Guard is tightening its noose around the city, and Gideon himself has become an unshakable shadow at her side, his suspicion growing sharper with each encounter. Rune knows the danger. If his instincts ever align fully with the truth, the facade she has spent years perfecting will collapse in an instant. Yet she cannot deny that his presence unsettles her for reasons that go beyond fear. His intensity is magnetic, his loyalty both admirable and tragic, and though she tells herself to stay focused, her heart betrays her with the flicker of something dangerously close to yearning. To long for him is to court ruin, yet the thought refuses to leave her. The chapter deepens Rune's sense of isolation. Even as she moves through the glittering world of court, she feels set apart, her every smile a mask, her every word a shield. The witches who depend on her remain her anchor, reminding her of the cause that gives meaning to her risks, but even that cause feels fragile under the weight of suspicion pressing in. Rune begins to wonder how long she can maintain the lie before it consumes her entirely. Each step she takes as the Crimson Moth is another step closer to discovery, yet each act of defiance reminds her of why she cannot stop. In Gideon, she sees both the danger of being unmasked and the tantalizing possibility of being truly seen, and that contradiction is as intoxicating as it is perilous. Chapter 37 captures Rune's delicate balance on the edge of exposure, her heart and her mission intertwined in a battle neither can afford to lose. Chapter 38 Rune. This chapter plunges Rune deeper into the peril of her double life, and the tension pulses through every page. The city feels tighter, more suffocating, as if the very walls are closing in on her secrets. Gideon's gaze follows her like a brand she cannot escape, sharp with suspicion yet tinged with something she cannot name. Rune senses that he is closer than ever to uncovering her, and this realization coils fear and resolve together within her. Each choice she makes as the Crimson Moth now feels heavier, riskier, yet she cannot falter. To stop would mean abandoning the witches who rely on her, and that, she knows, would be a greater betrayal than any exposure she might face. Her internal struggle takes on a sharper edge here, particularly as she reflects on what it means to live a life of deception. The mask she wears at court is polished to perfection, but beneath it lies exhaustion and longing. Rune yearns for freedom, for a moment when she can stop running, stop lying, and simply exist without fear of discovery. Yet she also recognizes the trap of that dream, for as long as Gideon hunts the Crimson Moth, peace is impossible. More unsettling still is the way her thoughts wander toward him in unguarded moments, imagining a version of their connection that is not built on lies and pursuit. It is an impossible fantasy, but its persistence reveals the depth of her conflicted heart. Chapter 38 heightens the sense of inevitability, showing Rune as a woman caught between survival and desire, rebellion and revelation, moving closer to a breaking point where no mask will be enough. Chapter 39 Gideon. In Chapter 39 we're brought back to Gideon, whose pursuit of the Crimson Moth has shifted from calculated mission to all-consuming obsession. Every lead, every rumor, every whisper of rebellion seems to circle back to the same center, Rune Winters. He has not named her aloud, not even to himself in full, but the suspicion threads through his every thought like a wire pulled taut. When he observes her in the glittering circles of society, he sees not just beauty but contradiction, a woman too careful, too poised, as though rehearsing every movement. These observations fuel his conviction, but what unsettles him most is not the logic of his suspicion but the feeling that accompanies it. Rune captivates him in a way no quarry ever should, and that truth gnaws at the disciplined soldier he has spent his life becoming. His loyalty to the guard remains the armor he clings to, yet cracks are forming in its surface. Gideon begins to question, in fleeting but dangerous moments, whether the absolute order he has been taught to defend is as just as he once believed. The Crimson Moth's defiance, so bold and so precise, suggests not recklessness but purpose, and that purpose troubles him. If Rune is indeed the one behind the mask, then the lines between right and wrong blur even further. Desire, duty, and doubt tangle inside him, each pulling in a different direction, each threatening to break the rigid certainty that has defined his life. Chapter 39 reveals Gideon at his most conflicted, no longer the unshakable hunter but a man caught in the snare of his own heart, circling closer to a truth that could destroy him or set him free. Chapter 40 Rune. This chapter brings Rune into sharper focus, caught between the tightening grip of Gideon's pursuit and the unyielding call of her cause. The city is restless, the guard more aggressive, and each mission as the Crimson Moth carries risks that would once have made her hesitate. Yet hesitation has no place now. Rune knows that to falter is to fail not just herself, but every witch depending on her protection. She moves with fierce determination, but beneath that resolve lies exhaustion, the weight of nights spent in shadows and days spent smiling beneath chandeliers. Each moment of duplicity chips away at her strength, and still she pushes forward because stopping is unthinkable. What haunts her most, however, is Gideon. His presence presses against her like a constant reminder of the knife's edge she walks. She feels him drawing nearer, his suspicion coiling tighter, and though fear prickles at her every time the paths cross, so too does an undeniable pull. Rune cannot deny the attraction any longer, though she tries to bury it beneath duty and secrecy. It is the cruelest irony. The man sworn to destroy her is also the one who sees her most clearly, the one whose gaze pierces the mask she has built for the world. In Chapter 40, Rune's conflict reaches a fever pitch. She is both the fearless rebel and the fragile woman longing for release, a figure who embodies strength even as her heart betrays her. The chapter thrums with inevitability, as though the collision between hunter and hunted is no longer a question of if but when. Chapter 41 Rune. This chapter carries Rune deeper into the peril of her own choices, her every step shadowed by the sense that time is running out. The Crimson Moth has become a legend whispered through the city, but legends are fragile things built on secrecy and daring, and Rune feels how close she is to being unmasked. Each mission stretches her thinner, demanding more daring than the last, and each appearance in society feels like performing on a stage where Gideon waits in the audience, keen-eyed and relentless. Her world has narrowed to two impossible roles, and the walls between them are crumbling faster than she can mend them. What complicates everything further is the growing intensity of her feelings for Gideon. Rune knows this longing is dangerous, foolish even, yet she cannot silence it. His discipline, his conviction, even the shadows in his gaze draw her in despite every warning she repeats to herself. She wonders in fleeting moments what it would mean to lay down the mask and reveal her truth to him, but the risk is unthinkable. Such vulnerability could destroy not only her, but the entire rebellion she has sworn to protect. Still, the heart is treacherous and it betrays her in glances, in thoughts she dares not voice, in the ache that follows every encounter. Chapter 41 captures Rune at her most conflicted, a heroine balancing rebellion and longing, secrecy and desire, as though the very act of survival has become inseparable from the yearning to be seen. Chapter 42 Gideon. In Chapter 42, Gideon sharpens his focus with the intensity of a man unwilling to be deceived any longer. The Crimson Moth has slipped through the guard's fingers too many times, and each escape carves deeper into his pride. He reviews every detail, retraces every pattern, searching for the flaw that will finally lead him to her. Yet beneath his relentless discipline lies the gnawing awareness that his instincts continue to circle Rune Winters. He sees her in the spaces between facts, in the silences of testimony, in the inconsistencies of her perfectly polished life. Though he lacks the final proof, the suspicion burns hotter with each passing moment, transforming the pursuit into something personal, almost intimate. But Gideon's turmoil extends beyond suspicion. Rune has become more than a quarry. She is a mirror reflecting parts of himself he has tried to bury. Her defiance forces him to confront uncomfortable questions about the very order he serves. If she is the Crimson Moth, then her fight is not born of chaos but of justice, and that realization threatens to unmake the foundation of his loyalty. At the same time, his desire for her deepens, turning his inner conflict into a storm he can no longer ignore. The soldier in him demands her capture, but the man feels drawn to her fire, to the dangerous possibility of seeing the world through her eyes. Chapter 42 crystallizes Gideon's fracture. He is no longer certain where duty ends and longing begins, and his pursuit of the Crimson Moth has become inseparable from his pursuit of Rune herself. Chapter 43 Gideon. This chapter plunges deeper into Gideon's mounting obsession, his thoughts consumed by the figure of the Crimson Moth and the woman he suspects stands behind her mask. The chase no longer feels like a mission assigned by the guard, but a personal vendetta, a battle of wits that he cannot afford to lose. Yet what gnaws at him most is not the elusiveness of his quarry, but the face that keeps surfacing in his mind, Rune Winters. Every instinct tells him she is hiding something, and each time he tries to dismiss it, her memory returns with greater force. She occupies him not just as a suspect but as a presence he cannot banish, a paradox that troubles him more than he dares admit aloud. In this chapter, Gideon's loyalty to the guard is tested against the stirrings of doubt he cannot suppress. He begins to wonder whether the order he has served so faithfully is as righteous as he once believed. The Crimson Moth's defiance suggests a cause larger than rebellion for its own sake, and Gideon, though unwilling to admit it, is beginning to sense the cracks in the foundation of his certainty. At the same time, his desire for Rune grows sharper, no longer something he can frame as mere curiosity. She haunts him in ways that blur the line between enemy and longing, making the pursuit as much about his heart as his duty. Chapter 43 leaves Gideon at a breaking point, a soldier pulled between loyalty and desire, truth and deception, standing on the edge of choices that will redefine everything he believes about himself, the guard, and the woman who consumes his thoughts. Chapter 44 Rune. We're returned to Rune, who now feels the hunt closing in around her with suffocating inevitability. The guard grows more aggressive with each passing night, and Gideon's gaze has become unbearable in its precision. Rune is accustomed to hiding, to slipping between masks with ease, but his eyes make her feel stripped bare, as though he can see past every polished word and graceful gesture. The thought terrifies her. Yet just as fear gnaws at her resolve, something more treacherous rises alongside it, the quickening of her pulse when he is near, the magnetic pull she cannot shake. Gideon is both her greatest danger, and the one person who seems to look at her not as a role she plays but as something real beneath the mask. Her inner conflict burns hotter here than ever before. Rune's double life, once a weapon she wielded with confidence, now feels like a burden that could shatter her at any moment. She reminds herself of the witches depending on her, the lives saved because of her defiance, the promise she made to fight even when it costs her everything. But no amount of conviction can silence the part of her that longs for release, from the lies, from the danger, and most dangerously, from the walls she has built around her heart. In Gideon she senses both destruction and the possibility of understanding, a paradox that leaves her shaken. Chapter 44 deepens the tension to breaking point, showing Rune as a woman balancing survival and desire, rebellion and vulnerability, as though her next step will determine not only her fate but the fate of all she has sworn to protect. Chapter 45 Gideon. This chapter deepens Gideon's turmoil, revealing how completely the chase has consumed him. The Crimson Moth is no longer an elusive adversary in the shadows. She has become the focal point of his waking hours, the figure who defines his very sense of purpose. Yet within that obsession lies Rune Winters, the woman he cannot untangle from his suspicions. He tries to tell himself that his fixation is purely tactical, that he is merely honing in on the weakest link, but he knows it is more than that. Rune has infiltrated his thoughts in ways that unsettle him far more than any enemy blade could. She is a puzzle, a temptation, and a mirror reflecting doubts he has never dared to confront. Gideon clings to the discipline that has always guided him, but cracks show in the armor. Each act of defiance by the Crimson Moth stirs a recognition in him, a sense that her rebellion is not rooted in chaos but in justice. That recognition threatens to unravel everything he has built his life upon. At the same time, his feelings for Rune sharpen into something undeniable, a pull that blurs the line between hunter and man, loyalty and longing. He does not yet know whether capturing her will bring him victory or ruin, only that he cannot stop circling closer. Chapter 45 frames Gideon as a man at war with himself, caught between the oath he swore and the desire he cannot silence, setting the stage for a reckoning that feels both inevitable and catastrophic. Chapter 46 Rune. This chapter finds Rune carrying the crushing weight of her double existence with an intensity that feels almost unbearable. The web she has spun as the Crimson Moth is stretched to its breaking point, and she senses Gideon's suspicion tightening around her like a noose. Every time the paths cross, she feels his eyes tracing the edges of her disguise, his questions digging deeper, his silence heavier with unspoken conclusions. Rune tells herself to remain calm, to remember her training, to keep smiling as though nothing is amiss. But beneath the poise and the glitter, her heart pounds with the knowledge that one slip, one flicker of hesitation, one careless word could unravel everything. And yet, even in the shadow of that danger, her heart betrays her. Gideon has become more than a threat. He has become an ache she cannot dismiss, a constant presence in her thoughts. She knows how foolish it is, how perilous, but the longing persists. She wonders if, in some other world, without masks and lies and blood between them, there might have been something real between them. That thought frightens her more than the threat of exposure, because it tempts her to imagine a future that cannot exist. Still, she cannot silence it. Chapter 46 brings Rune's conflict into stark relief. She is not only fighting for her cause but for the control of her own heart, a heart that refuses to obey reason even as the danger mounts around her. Chapter 47 Gideon. In Chapter 47, Gideon's inner conflict sharpens until it feels like a blade turned inward. His pursuit of the Crimson Moth is no longer defined by orders or the guard's directives. It has become personal, urgent, and dangerously entangled with the emotions he cannot suppress. Rune Winters remains at the center of it all, a presence he cannot banish no matter how hard he tries. Every interaction with her leaves him more certain that she carries secrets, and yet each glimpse into her fire, her strength, her carefully veiled vulnerability pulls him closer. He is torn between the duty that demands her capture and the desire that whispers of something entirely forbidden. This chapter reveals how fragile his certainty has become. Once Gideon believed his path was clear: loyalty to the guard above all, obedience without hesitation, the eradication of threats wherever they arose. But now the lines blur. The Crimson Moth's defiance no longer feels like simple rebellion. It carries with it a righteousness that unsettles him, a suggestion that the guard itself might not hold the moral high ground he has always assumed. To admit this aloud would unravel the life he has built, but the seed of doubt is there, growing stronger with every step. Rune embodies this paradox: the enemy he should destroy and the woman who haunts his every thought. In Chapter 47, Gideon emerges as a man teetering on the edge of choice, his heart and his duty locked in a battle that cannot end without sacrifice. Chapter 48 Rune. This chapter brings Rune into a state of near constant vigilance, her life narrowing into a series of performances where each smile conceals terror, and each step feels like it might shatter the fragile balance she has maintained. The guard's presence presses harder on the city, and Gideon's gaze burns like a brand she cannot escape. Rune feels him circling closer, not only as a soldier but as a man whose suspicion has sharpened into something more intimate, more dangerous. Each time their eyes meet, she senses the truth hovering between them, unspoken but heavy enough to choke her. She knows he is close to uncovering her, and yet she cannot stop herself from feeling the pull toward him that complicates everything. Her heart is a battlefield as much as the city streets. Rune reminds herself of the lives depending on her, of the witches hidden in shadows who see her as hope made flesh. That cause should be enough to silence the ache inside her, but Gideon's presence lingers even when he is absent. She imagines what it would mean to lay down the mask, to let him see her for who she truly is, but she knows such a moment would be both liberation and catastrophe. The thought terrifies her because she longs for it as much as she dreads it. Chapter 48 crystallizes Rune's turmoil, showing her stretched thin between rebellion and desire, survival and surrender, as though she is standing on the edge of revelation and ruin with nowhere left to run. Chapter 49 – Gideon. In Chapter 49, we are thrust deeper into Gideon's unraveling certainty. The pursuit of the Crimson Moth has consumed him to the point that the guard's orders feel secondary. This hunt is no longer about obedience but about truth, and that truth circles back again and again to Rune Winters. He sees her everywhere, in every inconsistency, every silence, every detail that refuses to align with the neat order his training demands. The suspicion has grown into conviction, though he has not voiced it aloud. Still, his thoughts betray him. Rune is more than a suspect. She is the pulse that drives him forward, the shadow he cannot outrun, the fire that both threatens and fascinates him. The tension within him sharpens, until it is almost unbearable. Gideon has always believed in the guard's righteousness, in the clarity of their mission to protect order by extinguishing chaos. But the more he studies the Crimson Moth's defiance, the less it looks like chaos and the more it resembles justice. This realization corrodes the foundation of his loyalty, forcing him to question not only his duty but himself. And all the while, desire complicates everything. His longing for Rune is no longer something he can dismiss as curiosity. It is a force as relentless as his training, one that threatens to shatter the walls he has built around his heart. Chapter 49 reveals Gideon as a man cornered not by an enemy blade, but by his own emotions, a hunter standing at the threshold of truth, knowing that to step forward will change him forever. Chapter 50 – Rune. This chapter places Rune in the crucible of her own fears, the danger of exposure pressing closer than ever before. The city hums with unease, the guard's net tightening, and Rune knows she is at the center of it all. Each night as the Crimson Moth, she risks everything to strike against injustice, but by day the mask of Rune Winters grows heavier, more suffocating. What once felt like control, the delicate art of deception, now feels like chains. And at the center of her dread, always, is Gideon. His eyes follow her in every hall, every gathering, his suspicion woven into the silence between them. She can feel him circling closer, and the inevitability of his discovery chills her as much as it thrills her. What torments her most is the war between her cause and her heart. Rune reminds herself of the witches depending on her, the rebellion that flickers like a fragile flame she must protect. But her heart betrays her, with every stolen thought of Gideon. His presence unsettles her not only because he is the hunter, but because he is the only one who seems to see through the mask. The paradox is unbearable. She longs for his gaze even as she dreads it, craves understanding even as it threatens to unravel everything. Chapter 50 sharpens this duality until it becomes nearly unbearable, showing Rune as a woman trapped between the fire of rebellion and the pull of forbidden desire. Her next move feels as though it will decide not just her fate, but the fate of everyone who looks to the Crimson Moth for hope. Chapter 51 – Gideon. This chapter plunges us back into Gideon's fractured world, where the hunt for the Crimson Moth has become inseparable from his fixation on Rune Winters. He stalks through the city like a man possessed, each new lead confirming what his instincts have been whispering for weeks: Rune is not who she pretends to be. He sees it now in every detail, the careful control of her manner, the way her presence seems to shimmer between truth and performance, the shadows that linger in her eyes. The soldier in him insists this is proof of guilt, yet the man in him cannot silence the part that refuses to see her only as an enemy. She is more than a quarry, more than a mask to be torn away. She has become the axis around which his entire world turns. This chapter exposes the full depth of Gideon's conflict. His loyalty to the guard, once unshakable, feels brittle in his hands. The righteousness he has always believed in falters against the possibility that the Crimson Moth's rebellion carries not chaos but justice. And if Rune truly is the Moth, then she is not only guilty of defiance but also a figure of courage, one who forces him to confront truths he has been trained to ignore. At the same time, his desire for her deepens into something undeniable, something that corrodes the walls he has built around himself. Gideon is left at a precipice, his next step uncertain, his heart and his duty pulling him in opposite directions. Chapter 51 frames him as a man on the edge of revelation, ready to unmask not only the Crimson Moth but himself. Chapter 52 Rune. In Chapter 52, we find Rune standing at the edge of collapse, the twin worlds she inhabits threatening to shatter into one. The Crimson Moth has always been her truest self, the fire she carries into the night to defy injustice. Yet the mask of Rune Winters, the dazzling noblewoman admired in ballrooms and whispered about in salons, has grown so convincing it sometimes feels like a second skin. Now, with Gideon's suspicion pressing ever closer, that skin threatens to crack. Each time she meets his eyes, she feels the danger coiled beneath his silence, the unspoken knowledge that he is circling the truth. And yet, even as fear grips her, her heart betrays her with its aching pull toward him. In this chapter, Rune's inner struggle takes on the rawest form. She knows she must focus on her cause, the witches hiding in shadows, the fragile hope she embodies, the rebellion that depends on her daring. But the thought of Gideon lingers like a shadow across all of it. She longs for a moment of release, to set aside lies and let herself be seen, not as Rune the noble or the Crimson Moth the rebel, but as herself. That longing frightens her more than the threat of discovery, because it tempts her to surrender when she cannot afford to. Chapter 52 captures Rune at her most vulnerable, standing between fire and ruin, her courage tempered by the very desire that could destroy everything she has built. The inevitability of revelation hums through every page, as though the collision between her heart and her mission can no longer be delayed. Chapter 53 Rune. This chapter brings Rune to a breaking point, where every choice feels like a gamble with no path to safety. The double life that once felt like power now feels like a prison. By day she dazzles in society, laughing and smiling in gowns that weigh on her like chains. By night she slips into shadows as the Crimson Moth, risking discovery with every daring act of defiance. The contrast between these two selves has always been sharp, but now the line between them is eroding. Gideon's presence is the chisel striking at the fracture, his gaze cutting closer to her truth than anyone else ever has. Rune can feel him watching, waiting, and though terror hums through her veins, so does something far more dangerous, longing. Her thoughts betray her more often now, drifting toward Gideon in moments when she should be planning her next move, her next escape, her next strike against the guard. She tells herself it is weakness, foolishness, the kind of distraction that could undo not only her but the rebellion itself. Yet the ache persists. Gideon represents both the end of everything and the possibility of something she has never dared to imagine, someone who might see her, truly see her beneath all the lies. Chapter 53 lingers in that unbearable paradox. Rune steels herself with memories of the witches she has saved, of the cause that drives her, but beneath the fire of rebellion lies a fragile yearning that will not be silenced. The sense of inevitability swells, her mask cannot hold much longer, and when it breaks it will shatter not just her life, but the fragile line between love and ruin. Chapter 54 Rune. This chapter captures Rune at her most fragile, even as she forces herself to project strength. The walls of deception she has so carefully built are thinning, and the strain of maintaining them bleeds through every moment of her life. At gatherings, she performs the role of the glittering socialite flawlessly, but inside her thoughts churn with panic. Every laugh feels hollow, every compliment another layer of the mask she is desperate to shed. And always Gideon's shadow looms, steady, watchful, unrelenting. His presence makes every interaction feel like a test she is bound to fail, his eyes searching for the crack in her composure that will finally reveal the truth. Rune knows he is close, she can feel it in her bones. Yet even as the fear presses down, desire complicates everything. She cannot help the way her pulse quickens when he draws near, the way her mind drifts toward him even when she tries to bury the thought. This attraction feels like betrayal of her cause, of the witches she protects, of herself. And yet the longing is undeniable, as constant as the danger. Rune recognizes the cruelty of her situation, The man who hunts her is the only one who might truly understand her. Chapter 54 paints her conflict in vivid strokes, a woman caught between her loyalty to rebellion and the aching vulnerability of her own heart. The inevitability of exposure is no longer abstract, it is immediate, pressing, and the chapter leaves her teetering on the edge of revelation, where one misstep will collapse the fragile world she has fought so hard to keep apart. Chapter 55 Rune. This chapter thrusts Rune into the very heart of her unraveling, as the fragile veil between her two lives grows impossibly thin. The Crimson Moth's daring acts still echo through the city, each one sparking whispers of rebellion, but Rune feels the cost of every victory pressing heavier on her shoulders. By day, she plays her part with the grace of a practiced actress, smiling through conversation, moving effortlessly through glittering rooms, but beneath the surface she is fraying. The act no longer feels like protection, it feels like suffocation. And through it all, Gideon's nearness intensifies the weight. His eyes linger too long, his questions slice too close, and Rune cannot shake the sense that he is moments away from shattering the illusion she has lived behind for so long. What deepens the torment is the way her heart betrays her. She should hate him. He is the enemy, the soldier who hunts her, the embodiment of the system she fights to tear down. Yet she feels the pull of him like gravity. His discipline, his conviction, even the cracks she has glimpsed in his certainty draw her closer, against all reason. Rune tells herself again and again that such longing is foolish, even suicidal, but the ache persists, leaving her shaken in ways that frighten her more than discovery itself. In Chapter 55, her dual struggles converge, the danger of being unmasked and the danger of wanting the man who seeks to destroy her. It is an unbearable tension, a collision of love and survival, rebellion and ruin, as though every path forward carries both promise and devastation. Chapter 56 Gideon. This chapter reveals Gideon at his most conflicted, his identity as a soldier fraying under the weight of truths he can no longer ignore. The pursuit of the Crimson Moth has consumed him, but what gnaws at him most is the shape of that pursuit, how it continues to draw him back again and again to Rune Winters. He has spent his life relying on instinct, on discipline sharpened into certainty, but now instinct and desire twist together until he cannot separate them. Rune unsettles him in every way. Her poise feels rehearsed, her brilliance too carefully placed, and yet she draws him in not simply as a suspect but as a presence he cannot escape. She is the enemy his training insists he must capture, and at the same time, she is the woman who lingers in his thoughts long after duty should have pushed her aside. The fracture in Gideon's loyalty grows sharper here. Once the guard's mission was unquestionable. Order must be protected, witches must be hunted, rebellion must be crushed. But the Crimson Moth's defiance gnaws at that certainty. Her actions are not random, not reckless, they carry intention, purpose, even justice. To acknowledge this is to admit that the guard may not be the bastion of righteousness he has always believed, and that perhaps he himself has been a weapon wielded against the wrong enemy. At the same time, his feelings for Rune deepen into something undeniable, an ache that corrodes the iron boundaries he has built within himself. Chapter 56 crystallizes Gideon as a man split down the middle, hunter and human, soldier and lover, loyalty and longing. He knows that his next move will define not only the fate of the Crimson Moth, but also the kind of man he chooses to be. Chapter 57 Rune. We find Rune nearly at the breaking point, her secret life threatening to unravel under the relentless pressure of Gideon's pursuit. Each time she dons the mask of the Crimson Moth, she feels the risk escalating, as though every step into the night could be the one that ends her freedom or her life. Yet she cannot stop. The witches hiding in the shadows, the fragile spark of resistance in a city choked by fear depend on her. To falter would be to abandon them, and Rune refuses to surrender, even as exhaustion gnaws at her bones and fear coils tighter around her heart. Still, she cannot ignore that Gideon is closer than ever. His eyes, steady and searching, follow her as though he already knows the truth, waiting only for her to confirm it. What unsettles Rune most is not his suspicion but her own feelings. The attraction that once flickered quietly has grown into a fire she cannot suppress. She thinks of him when she should be plotting strategy, feels her pulse quicken when he enters a room, and wonders dangerously, foolishly, what it would mean to be known by him. It is a longing that terrifies her, because it tempts her to imagine a life beyond masks and shadows, a life she cannot afford to dream of. Yet the dream persists, refusing to be silenced. Chapter 57 portrays Rune caught between two impossible truths. She is both the fearless rebel who cannot falter and the woman whose heart yearns for the very man sworn to destroy her. The duality is tearing her apart, and with each passing moment, the fragile line between her two worlds frays closer to breaking. Chapter 58 Rune. This chapter tightens the threads of Rune's world until they feel ready to snap. The mask she wears in daylight, glittering among nobles and courtiers, no longer offers her the comfort of control. Every smile feels like glass cracking under pressure, every carefully measured word like a step on thin ice. She knows Gideon is close, too close, his suspicion shadowing her at every turn, his gaze probing with the quiet intensity of a man who will not stop until he uncovers the truth. Rune moves through her days with the awareness that the game is nearly over, that her performance cannot last much longer, yet she cannot stop playing it. The rebellion depends on her deception, on her daring, and she cannot let it crumble. Yet within that storm of fear and responsibility, her heart remains her greatest betrayer. Gideon has become an ache that she carries everywhere, an impossible desire tangled with dread. She tells herself that he is her enemy, the hunter trained to destroy everything she is, but when she thinks of him, she feels something more dangerous than fear. She feels seen. It is that sense of recognition, as if he peers beyond the masks to the woman beneath, that both terrifies and tempts her. Rune longs for release, to shed her secrets to be known, but to do so would be to risk not only her life but the rebellion itself. Chapter 58 captures Rune at her most conflicted, torn between the iron weight of duty and the fragile pull of her heart. The tension swells with inevitability, as though the moment of revelation is already bearing down on her, unstoppable and near. Chapter 59 Gideon. This chapter draws us back into Gideon's mind, where the hunt has consumed every thought, every instinct, every shred of certainty he once held. The Crimson Moth is no longer a faceless adversary slipping through the shadows, she has become Rune Winters in his mind, her face burned into his pursuit as both the quarry and the temptation. He cannot prove it, not yet, but the weight of his suspicion has hardened into conviction. He studies her as one might study a cipher, each glance and word catalogued as though they might reveal the truth he both craves and fears. She unsettles him because she is too perfect, too polished, her poise carrying the strain of someone who is always balancing on the edge of revelation. But what drives him most in this chapter is not suspicion alone. It is the war within himself, the battle between the soldier he has been trained to be and the man he cannot suppress. If Rune is the Crimson Moth, then she embodies not only defiance but courage, a kind of justice that gnaws at his belief in the guard's righteousness. To acknowledge that would mean questioning the very foundation of his life, yet he cannot silence the thought. At the same time, his desire for her burns dangerously close to obsession, leaving him shaken by the intensity of what he feels. Chapter 59 shows Gideon as a man standing at the brink of revelation, both hunter and captive of his own heart, driven forward by a pursuit that has become as personal as it is inevitable. Chapter 60 Gideon. This chapter pushes Gideon further into the heart of his conflict, as the line between his sworn duty and his forbidden desire blurs almost beyond recognition. The guard still expects him to be unwavering, their weapon honed to precision, but his thoughts betray him at every turn. Rune Winters lingers in his mind, not just as a suspect but as a presence that unsettles his very sense of self. He is trained to see patterns, to pierce through deception, and when he looks at her he finds both. Every word she speaks feels like a performance, every glance layered with something unspoken, and though he knows it should only strengthen his resolve, he finds himself caught instead by the humanity that flickers beneath her masks. The weight of his choices looms larger here. Gideon begins to see the cracks in the guards' vision of order, the way their pursuit of witches feels less like justice and more like domination. If Rune truly is the Crimson Moth, and in his heart he already believes it, then she is not the enemy but a kind of truth he has been blind to. That recognition terrifies him, because to follow it would mean unraveling everything he has ever believed, and yet he cannot stop the pull toward her. His attraction is no longer something he can disguise even to himself. It fuels him as much as his duty does, leaving him torn between loyalty and longing. Chapter 60 captures Gideon at a precipice, his identity as a soldier warring with the man beneath, as though the next step he takes will determine not only Rune's fate but his own. Chapter 61 Rune. This chapter immerses us again in Rune's world, where the strain of deception has reached its peak. Every part of her life feels precarious, as if she is balancing on a tightrope strung above a void, and Gideon is the one shaking the line. His presence unsettles her in ways she can no longer deny. Rune feels his suspicion hovering like a blade at her throat, sharp and silent, ready to strike at the first crack in her disguise. Yet it is not only the fear of discovery that consumes her, it is the treacherous pull of her own heart. Each time she sees him, each time she feels the intensity of his gaze, something in her falters. She wants him to see her, even as she dreads what will happen if he truly does. Her duty, however, allows no room for weakness. The rebellion depends on her, on the Crimson Moth's daring acts of resistance, on the legend that inspires witches to endure in the shadows. Rune clings to that cause, reminding herself that surrendering to her desires would be more than foolish, it would be betrayal. Yet the longing persists, an ache she cannot smother, tempting her to dream of a life beyond masks, a life where she could be whole. Chapter 61 captures her caught between two selves, the rebel who burns for justice and the woman who longs for intimacy. Both identities press against each other until she feels she may shatter, and the inevitability of revelation pulses stronger than ever. The storm between her and Gideon has grown too fierce to avoid. It is no longer a question of if but when the truth will come crashing down. Chapter 62 Gideon. The final chapter before the entr'acte unfolds through Gideon's eyes, bringing his arc to its most dangerous edge. He has been circling Rune like a hawk, torn between suspicion and fascination, yet in Chapter 62 the balance tips. His instincts as a witch hunter scream that something about her does not add up, but the deeper truth he cannot shake is that his heart has already chosen her. This realization unsettles him more than any hidden magic could. For Gideon, duty has always been absolute. He hunts witches, he upholds the laws of the crown, he shields himself with loyalty to his cause. But Rune has forced cracks into that armor, exposing the man beneath who longs for connection, who yearns for something beyond the rigid life he has been forced to live. The tension in this chapter is suffocating because Gideon is not blind. He senses the weight Rune carries, feels the layers of secrets she holds close, and though he cannot name them yet, he knows they are dangerous. Instead of retreating, however, he draws closer, as if pulled by a gravity he cannot resist. In his heart there is a silent war, one side demanding he expose her, the other begging him to trust her. The choice is no longer about right or wrong, but about who he is willing to become. Chapter 62 leaves Gideon teetering on that knife's edge, his next step promising to change everything for Rune, for himself, and for the fragile balance between rebellion and order. The air feels charged, heavy with a sense that the story is not closing here but breaking open into something larger, preparing the way for the entr'acte and the next act of this dangerous dance. Chapter 63 Entr'acte Rune. The entr'acte acts as a breath and a threshold, yet for Rune it feels less like rest and more like standing at the brink of revelation. Everything she has built, the mask of the noble girl, the firebrand defiance of the Crimson Moth, the fragile forbidden pull she feels toward Gideon, converges here in a quiet but powerful interlude. Rune reflects on how perilous her double life has become, how every stolen glance with Gideon tightens the noose around her neck, and how each bold act of rebellion draws her closer to exposure. The entr'acte slows the pace not to ease the tension, but to make the weight of what's coming even heavier, as though time itself is holding its breath. Here, Rune's inner voice dominates. She questions whether her choices have been guided by strategy or by yearning, whether her cause can withstand the chaos her heart threatens to unleash. She admits to herself, in rare vulnerability, that Gideon is no longer just an obstacle or a weapon she might turn. He is a danger because she wants him, because he sees her in ways no one else dares to. The entract doesn't resolve this conflict, it sharpens it. Rune understands that the story ahead will demand more from her than clever disguises or daring escapes. It will demand the truth, and the cost of that truth may be everything she loves. This interlude closes like a curtain lowering between acts of a play, but the silence it leaves behind is electric, full of the promise that the second act will be darker, sharper, and utterly inescapable. Conclusion. Heartless Hunter closes not with resolution but with a lingering ache, the kind that latches onto the heart and refuses to let go. Kristen Ciccarelli has crafted a tale where survival, deception, and forbidden desire braid themselves into a single knot, one that neither Rune nor Gideon can untangle without unraveling everything they have built. The story is not a romance dressed in rebellion, nor a rebellion that happens to shelter a romance. It is both, each strand inseparable from the other, each fueling the intensity of the choices that drive the characters to the brink. By the end, the reader is left in a state of breathless suspension, perched between revelation and ruin, watching as two people stand on opposite sides of a war but find themselves unable to stop reaching across the divide. What makes the book so resonant is not only the sharp turns of its plot but the fragile humanity at its center. Rune embodies the courage of a girl who refuses to surrender her identity, even as she risks everything by hiding it. Gideon embodies the torment of loyalty, tested by the one person who makes him question the foundations of his world. Together, they show that love is not the opposite of war, but often the battlefield where the fiercest struggles are fought. Every chapter builds this tension, tightening it until it sings like a drawn bowstring, and by the entract the arrow is trembling, ready to fly. The conclusion of this first volume does not grant release but a promise that the next act will demand answers, sacrifices, and truths that can no longer be concealed. Ciccarelli leaves us in that fragile space between hope and despair, where readers turn the final page only to realize that the story has burrowed into them, waiting restless for what comes next. This has been the summary of Heartless Hunter, summarized by Cellwave Audio and narrated by Archie.